Today's epistle lesson from the Old Testament book of Jeremiah. The old prophet foretells of great things that are in store for the nation of Israel. He believes that God will indeed raise up a great ruler whom he calls the Lord of righteousness. The promised Messiah who would now reunite this nation and rule it in a true and righteous way. This king would be one appointed by God rather than the earthly leaders who had failed to live up to God's expectations. Time and time again. Next week we begin this 4-week period that leads up to Christmas, blessed season of Advent. It's a period of time that allows us, amidst all of the glitz and glamour of the pre-Christmas season, to focus on what is real and true and holy about this very special time of the year. This time of year is a favorite time for many, many people. One of my favorite television programs is Swamp People. The History Channel show that depicts the life and modern day tenants of the Louisiana swamps and bayous, and especially some of the families that hunt and harvest alligators as their primary source of income. And it's a hard life. Alligator hunting itself is a very dangerous and physically demanding life, a way to earn a living. And when the season ends, usually right before Thanksgiving, the hunters and their families look forward to a big, great, glorious celebration. And celebrate they do with large family gatherings that include such delicacies as smoked garfish, wild turkey, frog legs, grilled wild boar, and assorted stews that one is probably better off not being aware of all of the contents. One has to admire the Cajun society in some respects because they still manage to live a very simple lifestyle, a carefree but family-oriented lifestyle. The men who hunt alligators hunt with their sons, and they work side by side. One generation passes down its knowledge to the next. A story about an old Cajun who was fishing in the bayou all day and ran out of night crawlers. For those of you who aren't fishermen, that's worms. He was about ready to leave when he saw a snake with a big frog in his mouth, and he knew that them big bass fish liked them frogs, so he decided to steal that frog. That snake, he'd be a cottonmouth water moccasin, a pretty dangerous snake, so had to be real careful or he's going to get bit. So he snuck up behind that snake and grabbed him around the head. Now, that old snake didn't like that one bit, so he squirmed and wrapped himself around old Boudreaux's arm trying to get himself free. But Boudreaux, you see, had a real good grip on the head of that snake. Well, Boudreaux pried open the mouth of the snake and got the frog and put it in his bait can. Now, Boudreaux knows he can't let go of that snake because the snake going to bite him real good. But he had a plan, so he reached into the back of his bib overall, pocket overall, and pulls out a pint of moonshine liquor. And he put a few drops in the snake's mouth. Well, that snake's eyeballs roll back in his head, and his body goes limp, and with that, Boudreaux tossed that snake in the water. A little while later, Boudreaux felt something thumping down beside his foot. He looked down there, and there was that water moccasin with 2 more frogs. While the season from Thanksgiving to New Year's is the jolly season of family time, social gatherings and gluttonous meals, it's also a huge extravaganza in giving. It's estimated that Americans this year will spend $800 to $1,000 each on Christmas giving. And while Christmas giving has leveled off somewhat during the recent slow economies, it still represents huge amount of money. But unfortunately, sharing with the poor and giving to other charitable efforts, along with giving to the church, is not necessarily a traditional act for many people. Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, wrote, "To give away money is an easy matter in any man's power, but to decide to whom to give it, and how large, and when, and for what purpose and how, is neither in every man's power nor an easy matter." To be a good giver, one who follows biblical directions about giving, consists of three things. We use our God-given abilities, we manage our God-given resources, and we use those things to accomplish God's ordained results. Stewardship is not all about giving money, although sharing your wealth is certainly a part of being a good steward. Real stewardship is about having the heart of stewardship. In other words, good stewardship, you see, is a matter of attitude, something that stands behind your giving and your service. It's not, as I said earlier, what you give, but how you give it. The spirit in which you give, the why behind your giving. Doesn't matter whether we've been given great talents, outstanding abilities, or abundant wealth, or if we have very little of any of those. What matters to God is whether we make good use of what we have been given, whether it be great or small. Luke tells us in chapter 12, the 48th verse, "From everyone to whom much has been given, much will be required. And from the one to whom much has been entrusted, even more will be demanded." For example, when we are aware that we possess special gifts, special abilities, we have several choices. We can take those things and set them aside simply because they don't interest us. Perhaps you have a great singing voice, but coming to choir practice and singing in the choir every Sunday morning just doesn't interest you. So you take that talent and you set it aside and you reserve it for the bathroom or the automobile or when you're outside and no one can hear you. We can decide to use our gifts for personal gains. You might be a brilliant financier and you spend your time in front of a computer playing the stock market. But would you be willing to serve on the finance committee of the church? Or we can develop those gifts that we have and we can put them to use in God's kingdom. Many people claim that they don't have any special gifts, but God has given each and every one of us divine gifts, and it's our responsibility to discover those gifts and offer them to God's use. And when we do this, we can look forward to a lifetime of enjoyable stewardship and service to God. And then we have to learn to manage our God-given resources. To do that successfully, we have to come to an understanding that our life, you see, is a trust from God. Someone once wrote, "Stewardship is the privilege of using all God has entrusted to my care in a godly way." You see, a steward is someone who's entrusted with somebody else's property, somebody's wealth or resources, whatever. In 1 Peter 4:10, we're told, "As each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. Again, Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians, this is how one should regard us, as servants of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. Being good stewards, you see, is a basic premise of the Christian faith. And finally, we're to use our God-given abilities and resources to accomplish God's ordained results. We can't be selfish with what we have. You remember the story in Aesop's fables about the dog that stole a piece of meat from the butcher? Then he ran away. He wanted to go to a safe, secluded place to eat his meat, and as he crossed a little stream, he saw his own reflection, whereas he saw another dog with a piece of meat in his jaw. And of course he opened his mouth to grab the piece of meat from the other dog, and he lost what he had. That little story illustrates what greed will do to a person. There's a lot to be said for that old saying, use it or lose it. The treasurer has shown you the proposed budget for next year. My hope is that you'll pray about your participation and act accordingly. I simply ask you to do this. Search your heart. Ask if what you're giving to God really represents how much He's given you and how much you're grateful to Him. That's the simplest guide to stewardship that I know. The past couple of years have not been especially the best of times for our nation or for the world in general, for that matter. Many people have lost faith in America. Some people have lost their faith in God. But I believe that there's still great things ahead. I believe that there are great opportunities for our church to grow. I talked about that a little while ago. I believe that we can be a strong voice for Christianity because, you see, we believe in godly principles. I believe that America will return to greatness and that God will send to us a godly leader who will lead us, as Jeremiah described, in a righteous direction. And I believe that people all over the world will come to the realization that Jesus Christ is the answer to worldly problems and is indeed the way, the truth,